I used to think I had it all figured out. My wife, Emily, and I had been together for years, and I never once doubted her. In my mind, she was the one, the loyal, loving partner who would always be by my side. It was simple. We had built a life together, and I believed in her, in us. I never had any reason to think otherwise. I had this image in my head of how our life would play out, happiness until the end. Just the two of us. Sure, life wasn't perfect. I wasn't the most successful guy around, but I was working hard. I was doing my best. In my mind, that was enough. I wasn't rich, didn't have fancy things, but I thought what we had was solid, unshakable. It's funny, though, how easy it is to get comfortable, to think that nothing can go wrong. You hear about other people's marriages falling apart, stories of betrayal and heartbreak, but you never think it could happen to you. Not to us. I had faith in her. I believed that no matter what life threw at us, we'd make it through. I guess that was my first mistake, believing too much. Looking back now, I realize I had built a bubble around myself, around our marriage. I told myself that loyal women like Emily existed, that we were different, that she was different. And maybe that's why I didn't see it coming. Because when you're inside that bubble, you don't see the cracks forming until it's too late. I'll never forget that conversation with my neighbor, Dave. It started out as one of those casual chats. He caught me outside, just making small talk about work, the weather, whatever. But then, almost offhandedly, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Hey, I saw Emily the other day," Dave said. "She was at that cafe downtown with some guy, didn't recognize him." I remember laughing it off at first. I mean, Emily has friends, co-workers, people she meets with for work. It didn't sound like anything to worry about. "Probably a colleague," I said. "She's got meetings all the time." But Dave didn't drop it. "Yeah, maybe," he said. "But they looked pretty close. You know what I mean?" That's when I felt it, that sinking feeling in my gut. But I brushed it off. I trusted Emily. I had to. "Nah, I'm sure it's nothing," I said, trying to sound casual, but the words came out a little too fast, a little too forced. After that, the conversation shifted back to normal stuff, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying what Dave had said. They looked close. What did he mean by that? Why was I even letting this get to me? It wasn't like Emily to hide anything from me, right? But something about the way he said it stuck with me. I tried to push it out of my head, but that seed of doubt had already been planted. I didn't want to admit it, but it was there. And once that thought creeps in, it's hard to ignore. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every time Emily's phone buzzed, I found myself glancing over, wondering who it was. When she came home late from work, my mind went straight to Dave's comment. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. I wanted to trust her. I needed to trust her. But for the first time, I felt a crack in the belief I had in our relationship. And that's when things really started to unravel. After that conversation with Dave, everything started to feel off. I kept telling myself that he was probably mistaken, that he didn't know what he was talking about. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more my mind kept drifting back to what he said. They looked close. Those words stuck with me, no matter how much I tried to ignore them. I started looking for little signs, things I hadn't noticed before. The way Emily was always glued to her phone lately, how she would smile at texts and quickly put the phone down when I walked into the room. It's crazy, right? These were things that had never bothered me before, things I would have brushed off as normal. But now, every little thing seemed like a clue, like a piece of some puzzle I didn't want to solve. But then there were the excuses. She's just busy with work, I'd tell myself. People are allowed to have friends. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who jumps to conclusions without proof. I trusted Emily. We'd been through so much together, and I didn't want to believe she'd throw that away. So I kept brushing it off, rationalizing everything. Whenever she'd come home late, I'd force a smile and ask, "How was work?" I'd pretend like nothing was wrong, like that knot in my stomach wasn't getting tighter every day. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I just wasn't ready to face it. I kept going back and forth in my head. One minute, I'd be convinced that everything was fine, that I was overthinking it. The next minute, I'd find myself staring at her phone when she wasn't looking, wondering if I should check it. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because if I looked, and if I found something, then it would all be real. And I wasn't ready for that. When the truth finally hit me, when I could no longer deny that something was wrong, it felt like everything inside me shattered. It wasn't just about Emily anymore, it was about me. What had I done wrong? What did this other guy have that I didn't? Those thoughts kept running through my head, over and over. I couldn't stop comparing myself to this faceless man. I didn't know who he was, but in my mind, he was better than me. He had to be. Maybe he had more money, more charm, more something. Because if he didn't, why would Emily choose him over me? That's what hurt the most, knowing that in her eyes, I wasn't enough. My confidence, what little of it I had, was gone. I started to second-guess everything about myself. Was I not good-looking enough? Was I too focused on work? Did I not spend enough time with her? I kept replaying moments in my head, searching for the signs I missed, the ways I must have failed. It felt like a part of me had been ripped out, like the foundation I had built my life on was crumbling beneath me. I used to think I was a good husband, a decent man. But now, all I could see were my flaws, my shortcomings, the things I should have done better, the ways I should have been more for her. And the worst part, I started to believe it. I started to believe that maybe I didn't deserve better, that maybe this was my fault, that I wasn't the man I thought I was. I was stuck in this spiral of self-doubt and insecurity, constantly questioning my worth. I felt like I had been stripped down to nothing, left with just this empty shell of who I used to be. And no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed. Failed her, failed myself, failed our marriage. It didn't take much, just one moment of weakness, one moment where the doubt became too much to bear. Emily had left her phone on the kitchen counter one evening. She was in the shower, and I was just standing there, staring at it. My heart was racing, my palms sweating. Part of me knew that once I picked it up, there'd be no going back, but I couldn't help it anymore. I needed to know. I unlocked her phone and started scrolling through her messages. At first, it was just normal stuff. Texts from coworkers, family, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen, knowing that whatever was in there could change everything. I clicked the thread, and there it was. Text after text, confirming my worst fears. "I can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. When can we meet next?" The words blurred in front of my eyes. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I kept scrolling, reading through months of messages, plans, shared moments, things I had no idea were happening. She had been living this whole other life behind my back, and I hadn't seen it. I hadn't wanted to see it. I stood there for what felt like hours, just staring at her phone, the weight of it all crashing down on me. Every single message was like a punch to the gut, each one more painful than the last. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. When Emily came out of the shower, I couldn't even look at her. She had no idea what I had just found. She smiled at me like nothing was wrong, like our life was still the same. But it wasn't. It could never be the same again. I put her phone back down and walked out of the room. I didn't know what to say, what to do. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was gone. The truth was out, and there was no going back. It took me a few days to even work up the courage to confront her. How do you bring something like this up? How do you look at the person you thought you knew and tell them you know everything, that you've seen the proof? One night, after dinner, we were sitting in the living room, the silence between us heavy. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I turned to her, my heart pounding in my chest, and said, "Emily, I need to talk to you." She looked at me, confused at first. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice calm, completely unaware of what was coming. "I know," I said, the words barely a whisper. "I know about him." The change in her expression was instant. Her eyes widened, and then just as quickly, she looked down at her hands. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. That was what hurt the most. She just sat there, staring at her hands, not saying a word. "How long?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How long has this been going on?" She finally looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "A few months," she said softly, almost like she was ashamed of it. But it wasn't enough. A few months. It felt like my entire life had been turned upside down, and to her, it was just a few months. I wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, but all I could do was sit there, numb. "Why?" I asked. "Why him? Why now?" She sighed, and I could see the guilt all over her face. "I don't know," she said. "I guess I felt like something was missing. We've been drifting apart for a while, and I don't know. I didn't mean for this to happen." I stared at her, trying to understand, trying to figure out when we had started to drift apart, trying to pinpoint the moment our marriage had started slipping through my fingers. But all I felt was anger. Anger that she hadn't told me, that she hadn't come to me when she felt something was wrong. Instead, she went to him. "Why didn't you talk to me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "We could have fixed this. We could have worked on it." "I don't know," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Michael." But her apology felt empty. It couldn't fix what had already been broken. I stood up, my head spinning, emotions running wild. "I need some space," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "I can't do this right now." And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there alone. The weight of her betrayal hung in the air between us, and I knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a blur. I felt like I was living in a fog, going through the motions, but not really being there. I'd wake up in the morning, get dressed, go to work, but it was like I was on autopilot. My mind was somewhere else, stuck in the mess of emotions that had taken over. Anger, sadness, confusion, betrayal. It all hit me at once, like a wave that wouldn't let up. I couldn't escape it, no matter what I did. I'd be sitting at work, trying to focus on something, anything, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Emily and him. Every conversation we'd had, every moment we'd shared, felt tainted now. The life I thought I knew felt like a lie. The worst part? I couldn't make sense of it. One moment, I was furious at Emily for betraying me, furious at myself for not seeing it sooner. The next, I was crushed, feeling like I wasn't good enough, like I had somehow failed. And then there were moments of sheer disbelief, wondering how everything had fallen apart so fast. I couldn't sleep. When I'd close my eyes, all I could see were the texts, the messages between them, replaying in my mind like some kind of sick movie. I'd toss and turn, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I was supposed to do now. How do you move forward when your entire world has been turned upside down? Even when I was around people, I felt alone. Friends would try to talk to me, distract me, but nothing worked. It was like I was carrying this weight that no one else could see, and it was slowly crushing me. I didn't know how to talk about it, didn't know how to explain the storm going on inside me. I'd find myself breaking down at the smallest things, a song on the radio, a picture on my phone, a memory that used to make me smile, but now only brought pain. It felt like I was on the edge, barely holding it together, but trying to act like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. In the middle of all the chaos, there was one question that kept circling in my mind. Should I stay or should I leave? It seemed like such a simple question, but the answer felt impossible to find. Part of me, maybe the part that was still holding on to what we once had, wanted to stay, to fix things, to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what was broken. I kept thinking about all the years we'd spent together, the memories, the life we had built. Was I really ready to throw all of that away? But then there was the other part of me, the part that was still burning with anger and betrayal. That part of me wanted to walk away and never look back. It was screaming at me to leave, to start over, to let go of the pain and the lies. Every time I thought about staying, that voice would get louder, reminding me of the messages, of the trust that had been shattered. I was torn between two worlds. On one hand, staying meant holding onto the life we had created, trying to repair what was broken. But could I ever really trust her again? Could I look at her and not see the betrayal? On the other hand, leaving meant stepping into the unknown, starting from scratch. It terrified me, but maybe that was what I needed, to leave it all behind and find myself again. I spent hours going back and forth, weighing the pros and cons, thinking about what life would look like either way. I'd picture us trying to rebuild, going to counseling, working through the pain, but then I'd picture myself alone, finding a way to heal on my own, free from the constant reminder of what had happened. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make a decision. Every time I thought I had made up my mind, doubt would creep back in. What if I left and regretted it? What if I stayed and couldn't forgive her? I felt trapped, stuck between the life I had known and the life I was scared to face. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. At some point, I had to choose. Eventually, I realized that I couldn't do this alone. The weight of the decision, the emotional storm I was in, it was too much for me to carry by myself. So, I did something I hadn't done up until that point. I reached out. I called my best friend Tom. He's the kind of guy who always knows what to say. But this time, even he seemed lost for words. When I told him about Emily, the affair, and everything that had been going on, he just listened. "Man, I don't even know what to say," he said, after a long silence. "That's brutal. But you gotta do what's right for you." I could hear the anger in his voice, but he didn't push me to make any decisions. He just let me talk, let me get it all out. I didn't need advice at that moment. I just needed someone to hear me, to remind me that I wasn't alone in this. Then I spoke to my parents. That was harder. Telling them that my marriage was falling apart felt like admitting I had failed. My mum was heartbroken, and my dad, always the practical one, was quiet for a long time. "You're a good man, Michael," he finally said. "Don't let this make you feel like you're not. You deserve better." It hit me hard. Hearing my dad say those words, it was like a weight lifted off my chest, even if just for a moment. It reminded me that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't all my fault. Maybe I hadn't failed. I talked to more friends and family, and everyone had their own opinion. Some told me to leave, that I owed Emily nothing after what she did. Others suggested trying counseling, seeing if there was anything left to salvage. The advice was all over the place, and while it didn't make my decision any easier, it helped to know that I had people in my corner, no matter what I chose. But at the end of the day, I knew this was something only I could decide. No one could tell me what to do. I had to figure out what was right for me. After all the talking, all the advice, I realized that no matter what happened with Emily, I needed to focus on me. I had spent so much time wrapped up in the pain, questioning myself, that I had lost sight of who I was. I couldn't control what had happened or how Emily had betrayed me, but I could control how I moved forward. So, I made a decision. Instead of letting this break me, I was going to build myself up. I started with my career. Work had always been something I took pride in, but now it became my outlet. I started diving into new projects, learning new skills, and pushing myself further than I ever had before. It wasn't about distracting myself. It was about proving to myself that I was capable, that I was more than what had happened to me. I began setting goals, both personal and professional. I signed up for courses, attended workshops, and sought out mentors who could help me grow. Every time I hit a new milestone, it was like reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost. I wasn't just the guy whose marriage fell apart anymore. I was Michael, someone who was growing, improving, becoming stronger in every way. But it wasn't just about work. I realized that if I wanted to truly heal, I had to take care of my body and mind too. I started going to the gym regularly, getting back into shape. It wasn't just about the physical aspect. It was about feeling strong again, reclaiming control over my life. Each workout felt like a step away from the pain and towards something better. I also took time for my mental health. I found a therapist and started talking through everything I had been holding inside. It wasn't easy, but little by little, I began to understand that the betrayal didn't define me. I was starting to heal from the inside out. And day by day, I started to feel like myself again. Not the old version of myself, but a stronger, wiser version. Someone who had been through hell, but wasn't going to let it keep him down. As I focused on myself, on my work, my health, and healing, I began to notice something. Little by little, I was rebuilding my self-worth. I wasn't defined by Emily's betrayal anymore. I wasn't stuck in that painful chapter of my life. I was moving forward, and with each small victory, whether it was a promotion at work, a new skill mastered, or just feeling stronger in the gym, I started to feel like myself again. But it wasn't just about getting back to who I was before. It was about becoming someone better, someone stronger. I had learned a lot about myself in those difficult months. I learned that I was resilient, that I could rise above the pain, that I didn't need someone else's validation to feel worthy. And then, when I least expected it, I met someone new. Her name was Rachel. We met through a mutual friend, and at first, I didn't think much of it. I wasn't really looking for anything serious. I was still focused on my own healing, and the idea of starting something new felt daunting. But Rachel was different. She wasn't pushy. She wasn't trying to rush anything. She was kind, understanding, and patient. Qualities I hadn't realized how much I needed. We started spending time together, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself laughing again, enjoying someone's company without the weight of the past hanging over me. At first, I was hesitant. I had my guard up, afraid of getting hurt again. Trust didn't come easily after everything I had been through, but Rachel didn't push me. She let things unfold naturally, and with her, it felt different. There was no pressure, no need to pretend. I could be myself, and that's what made it so easy. Slowly, I started to open up. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, not everyone would betray me. Maybe there were still people out there who could be trusted. And as Rachel and I got closer, I began to realize that I could let go of the past. I didn't have to carry the weight of Emily's betrayal with me anymore. I could start fresh with someone who respected me and saw my worth. And in finding Rachel, I didn't just find love again. I found a new sense of self. I wasn't the man who had been broken anymore. I was someone who had rebuilt himself, stronger than ever before. And this time, I was ready to embrace love, not out of fear or need, but because I knew I deserved it. Looking back now, it's hard to believe how far I've come. When Emily's betrayal first shattered my world, I didn't know how I'd ever recover. The pain, the anger, the doubt, it felt like it would consume me. But here I am, standing on the other side, stronger than I ever thought I could be. Meeting Rachel wasn't part of some grand plan. I wasn't searching for love when I found her. I was simply trying to rebuild myself, to focus on my growth. But sometimes, life surprises you. Rachel came into my life when I least expected it, and with her, I discovered a new kind of happiness, one built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. But more than that, I discovered a new kind of success within myself. I realized that true strength doesn't come from avoiding pain or betrayal. It comes from rising after you've fallen, from choosing to rebuild when everything seems lost. The success I've found in my career, in my relationships, in my personal growth, all of it was born from those difficult moments. I'm no longer defined by what happened with Emily. Her betrayal was a chapter in my life, but it wasn't the end of the story. In fact, it was the beginning of something much bigger. It pushed me to look inward, to face the parts of myself I had ignored, and to grow in ways I never imagined. Now, I'm not just a man who overcame betrayal. I'm a man who found his worth, who learned to trust again, and who built a future that's brighter than the one I lost. I'm grateful for the lessons, even the painful ones, because they led me here, to a place of peace, of love, of success. I've learned that true happiness isn't about avoiding the hard stuff. It's about how you rise after you've been knocked down. And in rising, I've found something even better than I had before: myself.